Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're doing something really interesting. We're connecting the explosive, chaotic headlines of May 2026 with the meticulous, multi-billion-euro defense planning of a G7 nation. We usually see the world in two very different ways. On one hand, you've got the minute-by-minute breaking news of global conflicts, which is incredibly chaotic. And on the other, you have the slow, hyper-precise bureaucratic planning that governments rely on to actually navigate all that chaos. Well, we are going to bridge that gap. We're going to take a hard look at the highly volatile geopolitical map of mid-2026, and then we're going to examine exactly how a major power, in this case Italy, budgets, plans, and deploys its resources to shield itself and project stability. Here is our agenda for today. We'll start with a world on edge, followed by the global ripple effects and Italy's 2026 geopolitical blueprint. Then we'll look at 3 new bilateral missions, break down troops, budgets, and deployments, and wrap up with beyond military global cooperation.
Section 1. A World on Edge, Mapping the Middle East in May 2026.
Right. So we have to start by looking at the high-stakes reality on the ground right now. When you look at this timeline, it tracks the continuous, intense military operations defining the region this year. According to the Lebanese Health Ministry, by March 2nd, the conflict had already claimed 3,269 lives in Lebanon. And honestly, the situation has only intensified since then. Fast forward to late May, and we're seeing Israeli airstrikes hitting villages like Ramallah and the Tyre district. Almost immediately after that, Israel issued mass forced displacement orders from major southern Lebanese cities like Nabatea. And by May 28th, clashes are escalating even further near the Litani River. Both Israel and Hezbollah are just continuously launching cross-border attacks, completely bypassing earlier talks of a truce. It is an incredibly volatile, rapidly developing situation on the ground.
Section 2. The Global Ripple Effects, Economic Whiplash and Diplomatic Confusion.
Now, what's really fascinating is how these regional conflicts send immediate shockwaves across global markets and diplomacy. It creates this deeply confusing picture, a real sense of whiplash. On one hand, you've got global markets rallying. Stocks are literally hitting record highs, and oil prices are sliding down, all because investors are pricing in their hopes for a massive US-Iran peace deal. But then, you look at the diplomatic reality, and it's totally fractured. The US and Iran are issuing completely conflicting reports about multiple attacks happening during a supposed ceasefire. You have Washington striking southern Iran, Tehran downing a US drone, and right in the middle of all this, Donald Trump is publicly stating there's going to be no sanction relief while issuing threats over the Strait of Hormuz. So you've got financial markets operating on extreme optimism, while the actual diplomatic and military reality is just deeply hostile.
Section 3. Italy's 2026 Geopolitical Blueprint, the dossier number 704 case study.
So, this brings us to the absolutely crucial question. How exactly does a major nation navigate a map that's this volatile? How on earth do you budget for sheer unpredictability? To answer that, we're turning to dossier number 704. This is an 800-page parliamentary document submitted to the Italian government on May 19th, and it is a literal blueprint for surviving global instability. While the daily news is changing by the minute, this dossier represents months of cold, calculated strategy. It outlines every single international mission Italy plans to continue or launch in 2026. It gives us this incredible look under the hood of a G7 nation's foreign policy, showing us exactly where they're placing their chips and their people on the global board.
Section 4. 3 new bilateral missions, expanding the geopolitical reach.
Let's see how this strategy actually builds out, because this dossier explicitly authorizes 3 brand new deployments. Amidst all the global chaos, Italy has carefully carved out exactly 263 personnel for these new bilateral missions. They're sending armed forces to Iraq and Somalia, and they're deploying their Guardia di Finanza, which is their financial police, to Tunisia. And the exact calculated cost for this expansion in 2026? Nearly 21.7 million euros. This isn't random. It shows a laser-focused strategy on stabilizing the broader Mediterranean and African corridors, essentially creating an early warning buffer for Europe.
Section 5. Troops, Budgets, and Deployments, the hard numbers of national defense.
Beyond just those new initiatives, the sheer scale of their continuing missions is staggering. 11,642. That single number represents the maximum authorized Italian military personnel deployed globally across various operational theaters for 2026. But what's maybe even more fascinating is the backup plan. On top of that deployed force, Italy has authorized an additional 6,521 personnel as a high and ultra-high readiness force.
Think about that for a second. That readiness number has more than doubled since last year. That tells us exactly how seriously the government is taking the threat of sudden, unexpected global crises that might require an immediate response.
Now, let's break down this massive 1.8 billion euro budget, because it shows us a highly diversified approach to security. While the Ministry of Defense obviously takes the lion's share at 1.37 billion euros, you've got to look at the other slices of the pie. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, the MASI, is allocated roughly 354 million. Italy is also spending 31 million euros specifically on the AISE, which is their foreign intelligence agency, to support these missions. Plus, they're carving out over 21 million for interior and economic operations, using forces like the state police. It just proves that modern geopolitical strategy isn't just about soldiers and tanks anymore, right? It requires intelligence, financial policing, and diplomacy, all working completely in tandem.
Section 6. Beyond Military, Global Cooperation, the Piano Mattei and Strategic Stabilization.
Because a purely military approach just isn't enough, the dossier heavily emphasizes long-term stabilization. Backed by that 354 million euro budget we just talked about, Italy's programming targets the root causes of conflict. A huge cornerstone of this is the Piano Mattei, which is a dedicated strategic focus on the African continent. But their reach goes way beyond that. They're funding humanitarian demining initiatives, they're intervening to support delicate peace processes, and they're providing stabilization support across Eastern Europe, the Balkans, and the Middle East. They clearly recognize that sending aid, clearing landmines, and supporting local institutions is just as vital to their own national security as deploying troops.
We've looked at the intense, rapidly escalating conflicts dominating the news cycle, and we've contrasted that with the cold, hard numbers of a G7 nation's strategy to actually navigate it all. So, as you reflect on that extreme contrast between breaking news and bureaucratic planning, ask yourself this final question. In a world where explosive headlines change by the minute, how much does a 1.8 billion euro blueprint truly shield a nation from the chaos? Keep exploring how your own nation budgets for peace in a volatile world, because the numbers in these kinds of dossiers will ultimately dictate the history we all live through tomorrow. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the mechanics behind the headlines.